I'm going to start with actually discussing how I need to do it or set it out so that I can maximize my marks. And I'm going to say the first consideration needs to be the annual figures. Once I've discussed that, I then need to discuss the benchmarks. Once I have discussed that, I need to actually do my calculation and then my conclusion. So I already know my starting point. So I need to go into the question to see where they've discussed annual figures so that I can determine which ones I'm going to choose. And so I come in here, where have I got any information about the figures? I've got the draft financials. I'm doing Lego. So all I've got for Lego, guys, is the draft current year and the prior year. Okay? And then I've got assets, which I know is a benchmark that can be used. And then equity, which I've got percentages for. I don't have the percentages for total assets, so I'm going to work with just assets and equity as reasonable benchmarks. They don't give me any profits or income figures, so I can't use revenue, gross profit, or net profit. So if I look at my total assets, look at the current year and look at the prior year, seems pretty consistent. If I look at my equity, look at the current year and the prior year, seems pretty consistent. But what I can pick up is that assets is quite large and therefore they appear to be assets intense. And so that's more of a benchmark that I'm going to be considering, but we're not looking at benchmarks, we're looking at the year. There is consistency in all of them, so it's now about choosing your preference. Are you going to go with the prior year or are you going to go with the draft current year? Preferably, I'm going to go with the figures that are going to be closest to the figures that we are going to express an opinion on, which is actually going to be the current year draft financials. So let's start with that. And I need to explain and justify, so I can say we've been provided with the current year draft financials and the prior year. Okay, and then I'm going to say the current year take into account any changes and therefore are the most likely figures that we will express an opinion on. And therefore I choose the draft current year. And that's my annual figures done. And I've probably got 2 points there. Now I need to get to my benchmarks. Now I say to them, although they are income generating, they have revenue, no income items have been provided. They give us a revenue description, but they don't give us a figure, so we can't. Then I can say they are assets intense. Therefore, it is an appropriate benchmark. I could also say, yeah, they do have equity. Therefore, that is also acceptable. Now I've got to do my calculation. So I'm going to have my total assets and I'm going to times it by the 1 to 2% to get my figure. So I've got my 41533 times by 1% is 415, times by 2% is 831. Guys, if you didn't conclude above at the benchmark that you were going to go with one or the other, you might now go and calculate the equity. However, I feel that in terms of my benchmarks, because they were so asset intense, and it is an appropriate benchmark, although they did have equity, they weren't equity intense. So although equity is an acceptable benchmark because they have it, it's not as good as assets. And so I would actually over here have concluded with assets. And I would just do the one calculation. Okay. Then we get to our conclusion, and I would say this company has an increased inherent risk because of the management integrity or the fraud scandal. We don't know where things would be misstated based on that. And so therefore I need to lower materiality. And therefore I'm going to go with 415 as my materiality because it is on the lower side. If you chose more than, but still sticking on the lower side, so if you went with 420 or 450, you're still on the lower side of the 4 to the 8, so it would be acceptable. Okay, but it's nice because I work through my process and then I finalize. Let's move on to 2.